So we've heard the word refugee a lot lately. Little Alan Kurdi, the boy found dead at a Turkish beach after his dad tried to smuggle him on a dinghy to Europe. Hundreds of thousands of young men storming across Europe, 100,000 to Germany alone in the past month. Many claim to be from Syria, but as you can see, most aren't. Somalis, Pakistanis, Afghans, people from the Horn of Africa, wherever, everyone's stampeding to Europe, and many want to come to Canada too. But are they refugees? What exactly is a refugee? In my mind, when I hear the word, I think of huddled women and children fleeing imminent death, as in scenes from Schindler's List about the Holocaust. I think of women and children. I think of the elderly, the sick, the poor. As you can see from the images on TV, that's not who's in the boats and trains and on foot to Europe. According to the UN Human Rights Committee itself, about 3/4 of these migrants are young men. Women are barely 10%, children are barely 10%, 3/4 young men, eh? That's a higher proportion than the US military. Pretty much the opposite of our Western concept of women and children first. These migrants are leaving women and children back in the war zones. But that's not the legal test for a refugee, whether you're a woman or a man. The legal test was outlined by the United Nations in 1951 in the Convention Relating to the Status of Refugees, it's called. So 1951, this was when there were still millions of displaced persons in Europe after the Second World War. It was in the shadow of the Holocaust, and more disruption was coming in Korea. This was one of the reasons the UN was founded after the Second World War, to deal with things like this. So here's the legal definition. I'll read it to you, and then let's apply it to this million-man march going on in Europe, the welfare gold rush, and see if they fit the definition of a refugee. According to the UN treaty, a refugee is a person with a, quote, well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, unquote. A well-founded fear of persecution. There's one more part I'll read to you. Quote, this convention shall not apply to a person who is recognized by the competent authorities of the country in which he has taken residence as having the rights and obligations which are attached to the possession of the nationality of that country. So to be a refugee, you have to have a well-founded fear of persecution, and it doesn't apply to you if you're in a new country where you have civil rights. Oh, and refugee status doesn't apply to you if you're a criminal or have been involved in war crimes or have generally acted against the principles of the UN. So let's look again at the Million Man March in Europe. The fact that all these young men have left the women and children of their families back in Syria or Somalia or whatever actually doesn't legally disqualify them as refugees. It might be distasteful. We might wonder where their honor is. We might think, why aren't they saving their families or even fighting against terrorism or warlords back home? But that goes to honor and loyalty and respect for women. That's not the test. The test is, do these people have a well-founded fear of persecution? Well, for some of them, if they really did come from the Islamic State or other parts of Syria or Somalia, the answer may well be yes. But what about that second part I told you? Are these migrants now somewhere more tolerant, somewhere that gives them civil rights? And that answer for every single one of them is yes. Take that poor boy Alan Kurdi, photographed lying dead on the beach. He was allegedly from Syria. That's what the media reported, but it later emerged that he had been living in Turkey for years with his father, for years. His dad was a construction worker in Turkey. Now, there's no war in Turkey. Kurds aren't being slaughtered in the streets in Turkey. In fact, the Kurdish party entered the Turkish parliament in a big way for the first time in this spring's elections. I'm not saying Turkey is the best country in the world to live in, especially for Kurds, but it's a good enough place that the Kurdi family was living there happily enough for years. Same goes for the rest of this Million Man March. They arrive in Greece or Italy by boat, but they don't stay there even though it's safe. They keep moving on to Germany, where Angela Merkel has promised lavish welfare, a welcome gift of $6.6 billion US to the first 800,000 who arrive, or $11,000 Canadian per person. So once they're on Turkish or Greek or Italian or Hungarian soil and safe and have civil rights, they're not refugees anymore. Now they're economic migrants. Now they're welfare shoppers. They're not refugees, sorry. But one more thing. The Islamic State has announced that they're coming to attack Europe. No surprise, Islamic terrorists have attacked Europe many times. like the Paris attacks on Charlie Hebdo in January, like the Madrid and London subway attacks over the years, etc. They had a specific massacre, the Islamic State, on the shores of the Mediterranean where they murdered Egyptian Coptic Christians by slitting their throats so that their blood would symbolically flow in the Mediterranean Sea all the way to Italy, that they regard as the heart of Christianity, that is the Vatican. So the Islamic State announced their plans to attack, to invade Europe. Do you doubt that amongst the hundreds of thousands of young military-age single men who have come to Europe already, that there aren't more than a few who meet that last criterion I mentioned of being terrorists or war criminals, either with future intentions to do harm or ones who have already committed atrocities in Libya, Egypt, Syria, Iraq? 200,000 murders in Syria in the past few years. That takes thousands, probably tens of thousands of murderers. Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Syrian Army, Al-Nusra, there's too many groups to mention. Do you doubt that some of them have decided to retire on a German pension? By the way, I'm all for supporting real refugees, rescuing the women being held as rape slaves by the Islamic State, stopping the massacre of Christian Arabs. That's real. I think the best way to help these people is by destroying the Islamic State, personally, but helping these young men out for a European adventure of free stuff, yeah, they're not refugees. For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.